Welcome to Strata. I'm Glenn.
And I'm Brandon. Welcome to the Minds on Muscle podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Minds on Muscle podcast. My name is Brandon.
My name is Glenn.
And today we're talking about cognitive biases and fallacies. And boy, is this going to be a juicy one because the fitness industry and how people view exercise, there's a heck of a lot of biases. What do you think, Glenn?
I am very excited for this one. I love talking about rational thinking. I love talking about where our thinking and our subconscious brain will lead us astray. And I think if you really want to dive into health and fitness, especially if you're going to be a professional, understanding some of the common fallacies, biases, myths that are all out there are going to go a long way to making you the best professional you can be.
I think that's absolutely true. And it's funny because I feel like on this podcast, we already do this. We talk a lot about common thought processes and biases and challenge them and try to stack a little more academic, a little more science on top of it to help people think a little bit more. But this episode will be a little bit more focused towards that. And I always think back to when I first started my career. It was really this gentleman named Mario, who was the head trainer of the gym that I was working at 15 years ago. And that's what he'd always do is my whole career before taking RTS and other programs was really constantly being challenged to my personal biases and belief systems, which helped me, and same for Glenn and everyone else, develop a thought process that would eventually supersede our biases and allow us to ultimately learn new biases, but consistently re-challenge them and learn new information so we can move on and move forward. And in some cases, for both Glenn and I and many others, we've actually lost money in business because we've foregone specific thought processes and biases we had to learn new things, but has helped us grow into the professionals that we are today. So Glenn, you named some really cool biases when we were just talking about preparing for this episode. Why don't you kick this thing off?
Beautiful. So I'm going to read just a couple definitions, and I'll read the very technical definition, then I'll give a simplified version. And then, Brent and I are going to go over for this podcast really common fallacies that exist in the health and fitness community, and also like broader ways to think about health and fitness in general, especially when people are telling you, hey, XYZ is a thing. And you're like, is it though? And then you can have a discussion about it. And so cognitive bias, what is a cognitive bias? Well, a cognitive bias is a systemic pattern of deviation from the norm or rationality in judgment. Individuals create their own subjective reality from their perception of the input. An individual's construction of reality, not the objective input, may dictate their behavior in the world. So simply put, a tendency to believe something based on your own perception and not based in objectivity. This is a cognitive bias compared to a fallacy. Now, a fallacy is the use of invalid or otherwise faulty reasoning or wrong moves in the construction of an argument. So simply put, it's just an error in reasoning. And when it comes to health and fitness, especially in a field that goes unregulated, people will come up with reasons that certain things happen. Like, and I know we're going to talk about this later, if you don't exercise, your muscle will turn into fat, which is completely false. But people come up with these poor arguments that aren't really based in rationality, but might sound nice. And they tend to dilute the knowledge pool and move people farther away from their goals rather than closer to them. So these are a couple of the things that we're going to talk about in this podcast. Now, Brandon, I think it'd be great if we go back and forth and you kind of talk about a very specific fallacy, then I'll talk about maybe a bigger concept idea. How do you feel about that?
I feel like that's a good idea, and I'm happy to go this way. And it's funny, I think cognitive bias and confirmation bias kind of go hand in hand. In most cases, I don't think there's a differentiation between the two. So to stack on top of that, if we talk about something called confirmation bias, which I don't have the technical description in front of me, Glenn is prepared much more than I am, which I'm very impressed. I love it. Preparing, I love it. What is it? Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Therefore, I'm slightly prepared, but Glenn is much more prepared than I am. So confirmation bias, what we're talking about is the necessity to look for the information that will confirm your current thought process or cognitive bias. It makes it tough because if you're looking through data information, you're having a conversation with someone, and you have a straight cognitive bias as to, which we'll talk about now, a perfect example, cardio will help you lose weight. If you have this cognitive bias that cardio will help you lose weight because of a confirmation bias, because someone you love an idol, someone who you think is very attractive, someone who in your world has lost the weight or looks the way you want to look, looks that way, and they told you they did it, and they run every single day, and you go, they did it, I believe them, that means that cardio will help me lose weight. And this is an interesting one because I can't tell you, when I was working at Persicini Fitness, and we don't have the same aisle of cardio that Persicini Fitness used to have. But at Persicini's, there was this shopping gallery of treadmills, ellipticals, and bikes that would oversee the entire gym floor. And a lot of fitness facilities have this now, where it's even on a second floor overseeing the gym floor. And I remember I'd be with clients and I'd glance over, and at 10 o'clock every day, I would see the same group of people on the same machine, going the same tempo, doing the same thing for 45 minutes. And after being there for nearly a decade, I never saw anybody truly make a change to their shape. And I think this is a great one because cardio is one of those things that people associate with weight loss. And ultimately, cardio, aerobic or anaerobic exercise, does not directly turn into body fat loss.
100% agree with you. And it's interesting because you've also touched upon another bias, which I was going to bring up before, which is the authority bias, which is a tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure and to be more influenced by that opinion. So in this example that Brandon gave, it's a really great one actually that fits in well with this conversation, is you know somebody who got really lean and looks good because they did all this cardio, and you see them as an authority figure because they got to where you want to go. So you take their opinion and hold it in greater esteem. And we actually see this exist all the time. Another great example is the Hollywood star who got paid millions of dollars, who had the personal chef, who had the personal training to look great for their role, now telling people and giving people advice on how to be healthy and fit. And because they look great and they make millions of dollars, well, heck, they must know how it's done. And, maybe they know some stuff, but the fact of the matter is they probably don't know as much as they might think they know, or they might not know how to make it work for you because they are an authority figure in acting or in media, but not necessarily in health and fitness. These people have apps now and they sell their authority, maybe not necessarily to the highest bidder, and maybe they don't always have poor intentions or they want to make a buck, but they aren't, at the end of the day, what I'm getting at is they aren't necessarily the best person to be taking this advice from.
Yeah, I think that really grinds my gears because there are so many folks who have amazing physiques and look fantastic and leverage their looks as expertise to help them build an audience. And unfortunately, there is that general bias that if someone looks, there was a client that I worked with for a few years who used to did the Boston Marathon year after year. And she was a petite, tiny thing, tiny frame, no body fat on her body, really shredded, strong looking legs because she was running so much. And she looked really good. And I'd have tons of other clients look at her and go, what does she do? And they would talk to her and I run about 20K every few days and I do these, and they would instantly go, well, if she looks like that and she does those 20Ks, I gotta go run and do those Ks. And this is the problem, is that looking a certain way absolutely does not translate to the results that you're going to get, which is tough. And I mean, Glenn and I know some people who are not in incredible shape, so to speak, which I do think is a whole other conversation, because I think it would be great if everyone who was a knowledgeable exercise person made some changes to their physique. But these people are not in remarkable shape, and they're some of the brightest people that we possibly know, and they've changed so many people's lives. So we have to get past that bias, especially this weight loss one, like just being very, very simple. I mean, in the gym, you are not losing body fat by doing the things you're doing. You're affecting skeletal muscle, and those skeletal muscle have specific demands from the adaptations that you're imposing, which is why we constantly talk about adaptations. And the combination of those demands and the things you put in your mouth and the health status of your body is what's going to translate to body fat loss. But if someone just goes to the gym and does anything hoping it turns to body fat loss, it's not going to be a very successful road.
No, it is not, Brandon. And so let's move on to another one. Brandon, what's the next fallacy that you got on your list there?
I've got another practical one, and I would say that it is muscle will slow you down.
Tell me about it, Brandon.
Well, this is something I had a lot of at the gym. Again, we don't work in a commercial setting anymore. We're at Strata, which is a much more private place, and we have a lot of people who, think about exercise differently. But we had a lot of people at commercial gyms who, I don't want to get too muscular because if I get too much muscle in my body, it's going to slow me down. And in most cases, it was women, but there were a lot of male athletes that were concerned about this too, that I want to be explosive and fast, and muscle's going to slow me down. In most of the cases, these biases were based off of looking at gigantic anabolic steroid pumped bodybuilders who were my size, 300 pounds of muscle, and they looked like gigantic water balloon packs of muscle. And when you look at someone like that and they're actually moving differently because the tissue on their body is actually modifying their gait cycle, that's a totally different story. But I'll be honest, and I know most of you can find this online, there are a tremendous amount of bodybuilders who have that much muscle in their body and have practiced visiting those extremes of motion, contracting there and owning those motions, who are still tremendously flexible. In most cases, tissue will get out of the way, and the only thing that will really stop you from moving from a muscle end is if it's contracting to a high degree and you're trying to move into that shortened position while it's contracting. But tissue, it moves. And if you practice those extremes, those muscles will allow you to go to the extremes of motions. And in most cases, having more muscle and more force production will actually help pull you into extremes of motion better.
Yeah, it's amazing how you can see this even change over time. I mean, there was a period in sports, and nobody in the current age would remember this who's playing a professional sport, but there were times in professional sports where athletes refused to lift weights because they thought it was going to make them bulky and slower. And the NFL is a great example of this. I don't think it was until the 1970s that professional footballers started lifting weights. It was all the coaches said, oh, they're going to be big, they're going to be muscular, they're going to slow you down. And I forget who the strength and conditioning coach was that brought it to the mainstream. We started having these guys lift weights. And in the next season or two, these guys were just blowing past. Like their athletic performances were shooting through the roof. And from there, everybody starting to do weightlifting and resistance training in the gym to help improve their athletes' performances. But before the 1970s, it was quite uncommon to have your athletes in a lot of professional North American sports lift weights.
Yeah, one of my clients is an NHL player, and he's retired now. He's 50, so that was about 30 years ago, even younger. And when he was getting into it, he was at the very beginning of Charles Poliquin era weightlifting. He actually trained with Charles Poliquin at the beginning of his career. And Poliquin was trying to really enforce this idea of resistance exercise to these athletes. And although many athletes at the beginning of introducing resistance training did get injured, and it was not because it was merely because the progression of the resistance exercise stacked on top of their athletic ability and practices was not a good equation. But a lot of these players did get more explosive and stronger and faster. And it turned it and evolved really into this amazing outlet for strength and conditioning coaches to help athletes become resistance exercise folks and be more explosive. So it's amazing. But I find that to be a tough one because, in my opinion, the more muscle you can put on your body at the ages where you can, the more benefit you're going to have going forward, provided you're medically approved to do so and you're doing it safely.
Yes, and this example that you gave with the muscle actually also leads into another interesting fallacy, which is the false dilemma fallacy, which is essentially the all or nothing or the black and white fallacy. So it's essentially oversimplifying and either going all in or all out, all one way or all another way, right? Oh, lifting resistance is going to make me big and bulky. That's a little too black and white. Like, yeah, can you gain a whole bunch of muscle if you do it long enough and you push yourself hard enough and you have the right genetics and maybe the right supplementation? Yeah, you might get excessively bulky for what you want to look like. But is that what's going to happen in like overnight or the next day or even the next year or two? Probably not. I mean, most people would have to look at me and Brandon and be like, how long have you guys been working out for? And Brandon's probably around 20 years, and I'm probably just a little bit less than him. And it's not like we have a huge amount of muscle on our body. We have a healthy amount. I mean, people would look at us and be like, well, these two guys work out, but it's not like we have a ton. And it's unfortunate that the health and fitness world often looks at anything as very black and white. Oh, squatting below parallel will hurt your knees. Always? Squatting is a bad exercise. Always? Everyone should squat. Always? I mean, it's very black and white. And quite frankly, if you've listened to any of our other podcasts, you've probably heard Brandon and I talk about this over and over again. Exercise is a tailored process unique to you based on your own injury history, your preferences, your anatomy, your current physiology, what you can tolerate, all these other factors. And to say any kind of blanket statement about any exercise for you or anything for you in general is just plain wrong. It requires more thinking. That's just another one of these fallacies that I find is riddled all over the health and fitness industry.
Yeah, binaryism is a really bad way to look at anything. But when you're especially considering the human body, I mean, it's much more complex than a rocket ship where you've got all these different engineered pieces, and with the right specialists, you can figure it out. With the human body, we can pretend like we got all these specialists, but at the end of the day, we're adhering to this systematicity thing, and our body has all of these materials and all these contractile opportunities and these sensations and sensory somatic things that are all juggling together at one time. And pretending that we have an answer like squatting's bad for you, squatting's good for you. I mean, it's there. No, I know. I mean, there's definitely a gray area in between, and the opportunity for that gray area really needs to be considered, because there's always an exception, and there's always an opportunity to progress someone from something that might not be appropriate today to something that is appropriate tomorrow. It might not be appropriate for someone to do a machine squat the first time they come in, but 6 weeks from now, after that knee replacement's healed up a little bit, maybe even a little longer, and they get some strength back, it may start to become appropriate. So I think this is a great point, Glenn. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Brandon. What other fallacies you got there?
Well, it kind of lines up in the same thing, and it's this idea that results happen overnight. And I think of my step-grandfather, and he was someone that really suffered with back issues. He had a few fusions in his back. He had scoliosis, and the megakyphotic thoracic spine rounded up into a ball. And his chiropractor at that time said, you should really start thinking about exercising your back. And at this time, he was around 75, I think. And he hired a trainer. He worked with the trainer 6 times over 6 weeks, and he didn't see a change. And he goes, that didn't work. And that's something that just is really tough, because it's like saving money. It's like if you save $20 and next week you save $2 and a few dollars and it's $24, you're like, well, I'm not rich. I only saved a few bucks. You're like, well, it's only been a couple weeks. It takes a long time for our body to adapt. And it's funny, but if you think of adaptations and quote unquote results, most of the results that happen to our body are by virtue of survival mechanisms. And it's insane super compensation, hypertrophy, right? Hyper growth of the muscle that happens from so much stress over the body that allows these adaptations to happen. And so the idea that if you don't look how you look in 6 weeks and it didn't work, that's going to be disappointing for most people. And this is where you have to fall in love with the process and not be attached to this bias that these online TV salespeople are pushing out there, that you're going to get amazing results overnight.
Oh, so I got 2 things here. First, I'm going to piggyback off of what you just said. And I often tell my clients that as much as I want you to start feeling better now, I love when it takes you a little bit longer to feel better. And I say this because I think that when people start feeling better a couple weeks later or a month later, rather than right after the first session, it really shows that your body's starting to learn to adapt long-term to this process. And I find that the longer it takes my clients to adapt to something, typically the longer lasting that change is going to be. Any quick changes that happen to your body are going to go just as quickly, but the changes that take a long time to create, like adding muscle to your body, also tend to stay on longer as well. Brandon and I have been working on our muscles for, a combined probably 35 years plus. And if both Brandon and I stopped working out today for a month, we probably wouldn't notice any loss of muscle over the first month. And that's because this has been such a long-term adaptation to our physiques that our body wants to keep that on there. Would we get a little bit weaker? Yeah, probably. But would we be able to gain that back pretty soon? Absolutely as well, because it's been a long-term change to our physiques.
And you said something that if somebody looked at us that we would not necessarily look too jacked. I got to be honest. I'm jacked, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, me too. The humble me on the podcast and the me when I'm feeling myself are somewhat different personalities.
Fair enough, man. Did you have a second bias?
Well, the other thing I was going to say, and it was very interesting because you talked about these shows on TV, like the infomercials, where people are pushing a new product and it's going to be like 6-minute abs overnight. There's a couple other cognitive biases not biases, fallacies that kind of mirror each other in a sense. And one's the appeal to novelty and one's the appeal to tradition. The appeal to novelty is that something is superior because it is new. And the appeal to tradition is something superior because it's been long held to be true. An example of both would be the appeal to novelty is the infomercial. There's this new hot product. All these endorsers are having a great time. They're being very successful with it. It's brand new. It's brand spanking new technology. Therefore, it's going to work. And that's very exciting because it's new. Maybe this is finally the thing that's going to help me get towards my goals. Maybe, but also maybe not, right? I mean, just because something's new doesn't mean it's going to be effective. Likewise, just because something's worked in the past doesn't mean it's going to continue to work now, or we should continue doing it the way we've been doing it. I know a lot of people are into Pilates, and some people I've spoken to who enjoy Pilates are traditionalists. They only do Pilates the way Joseph Stott did Pilates when he first created it. And one of the questions I ask these people is, do you really think that as his knowledge grew and as he learned more, that he would be still doing Pilates the way he did it before he passed away? Or do you think maybe his process would evolve over time such that he found a way to improve his methodology and his system? And the answer is hopefully he'd want to improve his system as he got more knowledge. Just because we've been doing things a certain way for so long doesn't mean it's a good idea to keep doing them the way we had been doing them. We want to make our decisions and the way we look at affecting change in our body based on current and relevant information that makes sense and is held up to scientific and rational logic and thinking.
You've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And that's the challenge, is that with Pilates and yoga and many of these other traditionalist modalities, I mean, if you look back to the providence of Stott Pilates and you look back to the providence of yoga and many of these other ritualistic style processes, for most of them, it was not what it's turned into nowadays. They were very different. I mean, yoga was much more about spirituality and the mind, and yoga has turned now into this extravagant flexibility exhibition, and that's not what it was intended to be. It was more, the body portion was really an extension of having a healthy mind. And so I would completely agree with you. And that actually brings up one of the fallacies that I have over here. And it's that Pilates, yoga, and stretching are effective at increasing your flexibility. And I think this is a great one because I have done a lot of education programs in front of yoga and Pilates folks. It's been a little while now, but there is this huge bias that if I want to get more flexible, I want to do mobility work, I have to go to a yoga class and a Pilates class, or I have to do more aggressive forms of stretching. And I believe we've done an episode on this, but at the end of the day, stretching and pulling yourselves into extreme positions is not what's going to yield amazing results. It is the contractions that you do in those extremes of positions where you have the range of available contractile lengths and the range of available joint positions. And if you don't have the joint positions available and you keep yanking into an extreme of position, you're going to cause damage to the structure and ultimately lose out on the ability to go to that end range. So we're so much better to not pull ourselves into these extremes like many yoga, stretching, and Pilates practices do, and practice contracting there. If you can get better at contracting, much back like to what Glenn was saying about long-term results, you end up in this adaptation land of the muscles actually start to change their composition, hypertrophy, to be able to perform that a great way. And you get this anatomical long-term potentiation that happens where you can control it there. And then one could easily argue, well, as soon as I started doing yoga, I started increasing in flexibility. And you could go, yeah, no problem. What were you doing before that? Nothing. Well, that's because you did something now in those extremes that you've never done before. You put force through the tissue and it responded well. But here's the question. Is there a more efficient way to achieve that mobility where you could have long-term sustainable results and have less risk? I'm not saying yoga or Pilates are bad, but there's absolutely an opportunity to learn more about the mechanisms that work. And is it really the stretch you did against the wall that opened up the flexibility, or was it the isometric contraction through your midsection that was required to maintain that position, co-activating, that really opened up that mobility? And I don't think too many people are having those conversations, but it is very much that if an alien flew from outer space and they landed in a Pilates class or a yoga class, they would go, well, everyone here's really flexible. That means that this makes you flexible. Just like you go play basketball, aliens land near basketball players and they go, oh, basketball makes you taller. No, right? In reality, flexible people like yoga, tall people like basketball. And that's one of the things that we have to kind of get past is what are the basic rudiments that lead to flexibility? And is it possible that all those biases, cognitive bias, association bias, confirmation biases, and our traditionalist mindset is limiting us from getting the results that we really want faster?
Yeah, I really love that you brought that point that the aliens saying that basketball makes people taller. It's interesting because we all gravitate towards things that we are good at. When I was younger, my parents got me into swimming and they got me into soccer and art and all these different things, which I'm very blessed. I know a lot of people don't get that opportunity to try so many different things, but I had to try all these different things and I just was good at soccer. I want to keep doing it, so I kept playing. It's likewise, like I found at one point in time that I'm a decent public speaker and that I can articulate myself fairly well. And that probably led me into this position of personal trainer because I found the human body interesting. I could articulate how to do something to somebody and I was motivated. It's easy to stay motivated and committed to being on this path as a personal trainer because it falls in well with my skill set. So yeah, it does require looking at these situations with a little bit more depth and a little bit more rationality and picking them apart to see, is what I'm doing actually the cause of why I'm getting XYZ outcome? And the more we know about anatomy and physiology, especially when it comes to health and exercise, the better off we're going to be because anatomy and physiology really do dictate most of the stuff that we decide to do as exercise professionals in the gym setting.
All right, man. So I got a landmine I'm going to throw out there.
Blow me up, buddy.
So one of the ones I think would be a great talking point, and I'm hoping everyone listens to this part, is there's a general bias that personal trainers know a lot about exercise.
Go on.
And unfortunately, they really, really don't.
Hot take. Brendan Green, hot take.
So, and this is a funny thing, is that I do believe it's a little bit funny, is unfortunately, most of us, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you know the entry point to becoming a certified personal trainer is pretty low. Becoming a coach is pretty low. If you used to play football on a team and you're friends with the new head coach, they'll have you come over and help train the athletes as a coach. The entry point is low. And I have been very, very blessed, and so is Glenn in some capacity with some of the university speaking that you've done, getting in front of people and doing educational conversations about our industry. And whenever I get a chance to sit down with a personal trainer, and I had a 2-hour conversation with one yesterday over Zoom, and we were just talking about exercise, and there's so much confusion around exercise. And there are so many authorities saying, you got to do this type of exercise because there's this kind of science going on, therefore, da-da-da-da-da. And there's this authority based off that individual looking really, really cool. And I think it's confusing. And I think the general population will go, I want to get in shape. I want to learn more about exercise. I'm going to hire a personal trainer. And unfortunately, Glenn being one of them, I only know a handful of personal trainers, maybe a dozen or two in Canada that I would say know a lot about exercise. And I know hundreds that don't know anything about exercise. Now, I will say I know hundreds of trainers that know a lot of exercises. But knowing a lot about exercise and knowing a lot of exercises are two totally different things. Having a massive repertoire of different variations of barbell exercises and vernacular around different bar placements for a back squat and saying that this is a high back squat and this is a low back squat and this is a squat assist bar squat and this is a front squat and this is a hack squat and this is a goblet squat with all of the bar and all of which are different variations. That's fine if you know tons of variations, but knowing a lot about exercise and the general makeup of the ingredients that makes exercise, I don't know too many. And in fact, I have been doing study groups on Wednesdays about exercise mechanics for over 10 years on just exercise mechanics. And people that I've known who've been participating for a long time, there are still new areas to explore. There are still new things to learn because knowing about physics in the body is an ever-encompassing topic. And if anyone goes, I'm a master exercise trainer, run, because they are not. No one should ever consider them a master. And one of the things I love about people who I would say are really, really on the mastery road of exercise, they make very complicated things look like it's really, really easy. But understanding all of the elements that go into being a mastery level exercise practitioner, it's tough, and there's not too many of them out there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people equate memorization with knowledge. And at least to me, knowledge isn't be able to memorize all the different bones in the body or a number of exercises or a number of concepts. It's the ability to understand and draw from many different bodies of knowledge and different facets in such a way that you can create something different and new for every individual, at least when it comes to exercise. I think one of the hallmarks of an amazing personal trainer is if anybody walks in, they understand how to create and customize exercise for that person. If you asked me 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, you said, Glenn, I want to send someone to you. They've had 8 different replacements in their body. They have this immunological disease, rheumatoid arthritis. I want you to exercise with them. I'd be like, no, like, get them out of me. Like, I can't, I don't know what to do. Like, I can't manage that. But now you can give me anybody. And I've had clients who have cerebral palsy. I've had clients who have like rheumatoid arthritis. I've had clients that have had over 8 joint replacements. You give me anybody and I feel comfortable working with that person wherever they're at, whatever day. And for me, at least in my mind, that's one of the things that makes me a really good personal trainer, is that I know how to do that. I know you know how to do that. And I think most of the trainers at Strata know how to do that. And for me, that's such a huge, important thing.
And that's where consistently marketing that we are professionals, I think, is absolutely critical, that we are exercise professionals. And being an exercise professional is very different than exercise dispenser.
Yeah. And so on the note of hundreds of personal trainers, but you really know, a couple dozen good ones, there is this effect called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it's essentially the tendency for unskilled individuals to overestimate their own ability and the tendency for experts to underestimate their own ability. And a great example of this is myself, who came out of university 4 years with a kinesiology degree, thinking that I knew everything I needed to know about personal training. I knew how to dispense exercises. I knew all that stuff. And I had a shock real quick when people started giving me very unique individuals, and I didn't know how to work with them, and I didn't know how to help them. And I learned very quickly, just because I have some knowledge here does not make me an expert. And it seems like people who are unskilled do tend to veer towards thinking they know a lot more. And I think we all kind of know someone like this, or have met somebody like this at a party where we're talking with them, and we tell them we're an exercise professional, and they're like, oh yeah, I exercise, and they start telling you all this stuff about exercise that they know and they do, and they're saying some things where you're like, yeah, but I don't know if that's fully correct. And you can start picking out their fallacies and their biases and the way they're explaining how they look at exercise. And this is a very prominent one, especially with new personal trainers who have been newly certified and are new to the field.
I mean, much like that yourself. I mean, I went through the exact same experience where I learned a lot of stuff, and I started working with humans, and working with a sensitive population at Persicini Fitness really rattled me and really forced me to learn more and more so I could help more demographics. And even to the inception of Strata, I had a totally different workflow process, body view, world view around exercise. And it wasn't until several conversations of academic research, learning, and practical exercises through my friend Charlie McMillan, and later to be Greg Mack and Kevin Dunn and a few others, that I really learned more about, whoa, I actually have no idea what I'm doing. And I had this plan that this place was going to be an education center for some very specific education platforms. I had some pretty serious conversations about it, and I abandoned all of that completely. Now, the funny thing is, there was an opportunity for me to make more money, have more notoriety, continue to have people fly from New Jersey to come see me once every few months, which was a really cool thing to have happen. And it would have been very easy for me to do that, because if I thought about it in the way, and I wasn't thinking about it, but if I continued down that Dunning-Kruger road and that association bias, that I know that I'm doing some things that I could be doing better. But if I keep doing it this way, I'll make more money. I'll see real cool people. I might even get into some professional sports worlds by doing this thing, but I'll know that I'm not doing something to the full ethical value and as honestly as I possibly could, which really, really stunk. I mean, opening a brand new business and completely changing your workflow process was a big bummer. And I'm not trying to toot my horn here, but that's something I'm very proud of, is that I didn't succumb to the business monetization, expertise, celebrityism that could have came with certain things I was doing, we kind of just reevaluated what we were doing. And I'm super honored that everyone here was open to doing that research with me and learning about it together. And as such, I believe that we've really created at Strata a facility that is stand above in Canada, not just Ontario, for the level of professionalism. But it was real easy that we could have gone down that Dunning-Kruger road and been busier and all made more money. But how ethical would that have been? Because we wouldn't have been helping clients the same way. And that was I'm proud of that, but you could see how it would be very easy for someone to, if they had major expenses, a major loan, to abort some of the information they learned to continue down a road they know is not going the direction they want to go.
It's one of the interesting things about talking about fallacies and biases is how much they are all interwoven with each other. Even just in this conversation that we've had for the past 30 or 40 minutes, everything that I've said, you've had an example of that kind of goes into your next point. And then I've got one that kind of flows off that. And it's interesting. You talk about ethos. Like if I went this celebrity trainer route, it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be in line with my ethos. And that probably wouldn't feel good. And there's actually another bias there. It's cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is when you hold two opinions to be true, even though rationally and logically they oppose each other. And it often manifests as a kind of, how do I put this? Like a psychological stress. And an example might be, and might not be necessarily health and fitness related, but it's just the one that comes to me, is someone who loves animals and loves playing with them and loves seeing them with somebody who also eats animals. Right? For some people, that is hard to manage both those thoughts in their head at one time, unless they can kind of logically, rationally work that out. And so for you, if you knew that I want to have the most scientific, logical knowledge at my hands to help my clients, and I know this is the best way to do it, but it's not going to make me that much money right now, so I'm going to do something different. That could cause you some undue psychological stress. And I know, at least for myself, I sleep well at night knowing that I'm doing the best that I can for my clients in an open and honest way that's built on trust, and both of us moving forward towards our goals, mine of becoming the best professional I can and earning a living, and them with feeling good and moving well. And I think a lot of people actually have a hard time sometimes sleeping at night because how they act in their day-to-day life and what they do for a living actually doesn't coincide with their morals and the values in the way that it ought to. And so, I commend you for that, Brandon. And I love the way that you've run your facility and the route you're going, because I get to be a part of it and I'm the benefactor of it. And so are all of our clients.
Well, thank you. And as you know, I tend to be a lot more humble in most cases about most things, but I would say that I am really looking back. I'm not often one that looks back and smells the roses. I like to look straight ahead and see where we're going. But looking back on that specific opportunity to go down a cognitive bias and Dunning-Kruger road, I am really proud of that, because I think that as much as it was a very painful process, and, I used to say to Katie 6 years ago, hey, I know I could go anywhere in the world and I could sleep on somebody's couch, from all the people that I used to know that were instructors with me on different things and different programs. And for several years, I really did believe that. I probably know I could fly anywhere and crash at somebody's house for a couple days in the world. And now I would definitely say I cannot say that. I know a lot of people as as distant old connections, but now that source of people where I used to know hundreds of people that were in the same world as me, that think about things, it's down to a very, very small few. And in fact, the majority of them are right here in Strata with you and Chris and Taylor and Eric and Anna and everyone else. So yeah, I am really happy about that. So that leads to one more little kind of like extension of that Dunning-Kruger syndrome. And I think it's an interesting bias conversation. And I think we can make it a tiny bit more academic. And I'd love for you to kind of riff off of this before I go down it at all. This idea and this bias that physical therapists and other forms of therapists can isolate specific divisions of muscles and specific organs.
I mean, oh boy, Brandon, how do we even begin to get into this one here?
I know. I love hamburgers. Don't you love hamburgers, Glenn?
I do love hamburgers, Brandon.
Hamburgers are a perfect example. I just did a little free webinar on the PAP thing where I was talking about rethinking warm-ups, and this came up, and we talked about this idea of a hamburger analogy. And I want you to think about any form of therapy or therapy-style exercise like foam rolling or lacrosse ball rolling, and think about you have someone who's affecting just your fascia, just your muscle, just your ligaments, just your tendon, just doing a joint mob, right? Is there any way that you could grab a whole hamburger and do one of those techniques and not influence every single piece of that hamburger? Think of the biggest hamburger you've ever had. You think of a double Big Mac with all the special sauce, the lettuce, cheese, tomato, and all that, and you put your finger in the top bun. You're telling me that there's no force going to that bottom bun. There is. And no matter what, any organ, any specific division of muscle, you are influencing every part of the hamburger, and the body is built just the same. Between the most superficial layer of your skin all the way to the deepest layer of tissue before your bone, it is a hamburger. And you cannot isolate any one thing, which brings up some really interesting questions, because if you're going to get your IT band released, your hip flexors loosened up, your plantar fascia worked on, what's really going on there?
Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch.
What's really going on there?
There's a whole bunch I'm sure there's a whole bunch going on there, but I don't think we can really make an inference as to where that unwanted sensation might be coming from without doing a little bit of data collection first. And even then, who can really ever say where something is truly coming from right away? I mean, we can't go inside the human body. We can't ask the human body at any given time. We can only do our best to collect the best knowledge and information we can on a human being, come up with a hypothesis as to what we think is happening, and then do some work to try to test that hypothesis. And as we get more information, turn it into a theory, and then hopefully help this person feel their best.
You know who can see what's going on in the inside?
Oh boy, who, Brendan?
Radiologists and Superman. Right? And this is the whole thing, is that this is part of the reason why myself and Glenn and many others have not ever really gone down any of the therapeutic routes of becoming a kinesiologist, athletic therapist, massage therapist, physical therapist, or chiropractor, is that we have to adhere to this systematicity idea of the body. And it's not that we have to, it's not like it's a rule that we're setting in place, it's that this thing's a system. It grew together. All those things are stacked together. And even when you affect one hamburger, you got 15 other hamburgers that are all stacked beside it. And every time you do one thing to one part of the hamburger, you're affecting all of them through one organ or another. And so we got to get past this bias of my adductors tight, or my glute needs releasing or activating. It's not true. It has to be more joint systems thought, and then respecting that those joint systems are connected to other systems. And that's a very interesting bias, and one of the ones that we work very hard to teach our clients about, because once they learn this idea of systematicity and where their sensations come in and the adaptations come in, they get much better and much faster results.
Yeah, sometimes I think about it. I don't know where these thoughts of mine come from, like a domino and a domino effect. And we might have all seen those videos where someone's got one domino and they flick that one domino, then all the other dominoes after it start falling down. Except, you might flick that one domino, but it's somehow set up so there's chains and all the dominoes fall together, and the camera pans up, and it's this beautiful art of dominoes set up in a certain way to look like something. But it all happened from that one flick of one domino. And quite frankly, the body functions like that too. You change just one piece, or you manipulate one piece in some way with exercise or with joint mobility or whatever that is, you are going to affect all the other pieces or all those other dominoes. You can't not affect things like that. Everything in life is so intimately tied together, whether it is your human body or anything. I mean, if you wake up and you have a cup of coffee and you meditate for 5 minutes and that feels good, it might change the rest of your day and how it shows up. And that's beautiful as well. But when it comes to the human body, you affect any one piece, you're going to affect all the other pieces. They're all neurologically wired together. They communicate on so many different levels with each other outside of the brain. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
I couldn't agree more. Glenn, do you have any more biases?
I had two, so I'm going to go over them real quick, because I think they're pretty important. One is survivorship bias, and this is focusing on individuals or people who made it and they got past some selection process, and as a result, we've overlooked those people that didn't make it because of their lack of visibility. And this is really prominent on social media, where we see all these people with great bodies selling their products, or they've got a huge Instagram following, and they're telling you all the stuff that they did to get to where they go. And you think that's a good idea. But what you don't see is all the people that also tried doing what that person did that didn't make it. And there's probably a lot more of them than that person. And this is because that advice they're giving may not be applicable to those people. It may be too intense. There might be too much information. They might be giving wrong information for those people's anatomy or their physiology or whatever that is. So survivorship bias is a very real thing. We have to be very cautious when we take advice from people, because just because it worked for them and they're considered the authority or the best doesn't mean it's going to necessarily work for us. I don't know if you have anything you want to say on that, or if you want to just continue to the next one.
Yeah, go to the next one, man. I love it.
Beautiful. The last one here is pretty important one to me, and that's a naturalistic fallacy. And it essentially says that just because something is natural does not mean it's good or superior to something that is not natural. Our world that we live in right now is filled with unnatural things, but a lot of them have been really, really great. A lot of people don't suffer from disease because they can take a vitamin D supplement. A lot of people don't understand this necessarily, but vitamin D is a steroid. It acts like a steroid, or I should say a hormone in the body. And people that don't have as much vitamin D in their body or have a vitamin D deficiency tend to have lower immune systems. They tend to have and experience more stress in their life. They tend to have less outcomes of health. Vitamin D is a pretty important thing. The fact that we can now get that in supplementation that isn't natural is amazing. And it's the same thing with hospitals. If I broke my arm, I don't want to say, oh, I got to let nature take its course and just have this broken arm hanging around and try to hope that it heals on its own. I want to get to a hospital ASAP and take advantage of all these things that we've created as these intelligent human beings to help this arm heal, so I can go back to doing all the stuff that I want to in my life. Just because something is unnatural or didn't come from the ground or the earth doesn't mean that it can't be helpful and something amazing for you or the ones around you. So I encourage people to drop the idea that just because something isn't natural doesn't mean it's not healthy, because one of the things that people in the world of nutrition especially tout is that it's all natural. And you think to yourself, oh, if it's all natural and organic, it must be amazing. But that's not necessarily true. We might be able to take two fruits, one that is organic, that was flown to you from California, and take something that is maybe inorganic but grown locally, and they might have the same nutrition content. They might have the same effect on your body, or very similar, but the organic one flown to you from California, because of the fees and the way it's grown and the transportation costs, ends up costing you double. And you could get the same benefits from something else that was grown locally right around the corner. So I encourage everybody to think about survivorship bias and the naturalistic fallacy next time they're making some sort of decision about their health and their wellness. Brandon, is there anything that you want to? Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Funny
Brandon.
you say with that natural thing. I think that's really funny because I lived, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I lived in China for half a year, and I taught speaking skills and oral English presentation to engineering students at a school in Wuhan, China, which is funny enough, no one had ever heard of Wuhan, China, ever, until this virus. And now I tell people I taught in Wuhan, China, they're like, oh my gosh, how was it? And I'm like, well, it was fine, because it was nothing, because Wuhan, China at that time was a rather undeveloped area. And so the engineering school that I was teaching in was an engineering school that was quite literally, the whole campus was plotted in the middle of several farmer fields. So as soon as you left the campus walls, it was just greens and greens and greens of farms, which are not nearly as pretty as they are here, but ultimately they were just organic farms. And inside the school, there were these markets, and I would buy a bag of 30 oranges for the equivalent of like 30 cents Canadian. Like, it was ridiculous. And they were the ugliest, stankiest looking oranges I'd ever purchased. But they were the most dense, delicious, fruitful, the best tasting thing. And I mean, they were the most natural oranges with manure in a field across the street, freshly picked, ugly looking, and they were amazing. And then you go to the grocery store here and you get these oranges that look lush and beautiful, and you could have 6 of them and you could take a beautiful photo of them. And they are definitely not natural, definitely pumped up to make look like that. And they taste like water. And, I always wondered, I was like, well, which one of these is going to be healthier for me? And is there a real difference? So I think that's a great example, Glenn. Thank you for that. I love it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Most people don't realize that most foods and vegetables that we see in the store these days have been like genetically crossbred for generations to look like and be how they were. If you were to look at strawberries 100 years ago, they're these tiny little things the size of your thumb. And now they're these giant plump things. It's not natural, but it is what it is. So Brandon, if it's okay, just to round out a couple things I want to share with people as we close it out here is the best place to start, at least in my opinion, when it comes to biases and fallacies, is to be aware of them and what they are. Just the fact that you're listening to this podcast and you've heard a couple of biases and you've heard a couple of fallacies means that you're now going to start recognizing them when people try to sell you things, try to show you things. You'll be able to reason and logic your way through things a little bit better. And another great way to start using your logical and rational thinking capacities a little bit more, especially when it comes to biases and fallacies, is just to stop and think about things. Go off autopilot. When you hear somebody make a claim, especially if it sounds a little bit too good to be true, start thinking about it a little bit more. Don't just accept it for what it is. I think one of the hallmarks of a strong human being is the ability to stop, think about something logically and rationally, and then make a decision from there. So that is what I'd like to leave the people at home with today.
And I'll throw in there, just to add on top of that, is consistently challenge how you're thinking about things. I think that a very easy way that you could try to get past your biases is when you're doing anything that you do. The way you work, the way you think about work, the way you think about your relationship, the way you drive your car, the road you take to the car, the road you take to get to your destination. Challenge it and go, well, what happens if I take a different route to get to work? What happens if instead of me text messaging all of my clients, I'm going to call all of them to touch base? Instead of me not teaching my clients about this weird anatomy thing when I do a squats, what happens if I do? What happens if I change my entire outlook on how I do any one thing? And ultimately, if you consistently do something that challenges your thought process and scares the snot out of you at least once a day, after years, you'll get to a place where you just kind of end up rethinking everything. And it creates this, you're not going to be the most favorite person because you're always asking more questions and trying to learn more, but it creates an amazing opportunity for personal development and creates a thought process that allows you to rethink everything and just have an exponential growth perspective. So I love it. This was a fun episode, Glenn. Yeah, this was great.
I really love talking about thinking and thinking about thinking. And I was really looking forward to this episode for a while. So I'm glad we finally made it happen, Brandon.
So Glenn, what is your pick of the week?
I'm glad you asked. And by the time this episode comes out, it might be a little bit dated, but I encourage everybody to go back and revisit it anyways. It is February 2nd today. And my girlfriend and I have been doing this thing for the past 3 or 4 years, but we just kind of officially named it today, which is Groundhog Date. And Groundhog Date is a date that we do every year where we cook a meal, a delicious, healthy meal, and we watch the movie Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day is, I think it's an 80s movie starring Andy McDowell and Bill Murray. And it's essentially about a gentleman who is a TV broadcaster. He covers the news. And every year they send him to cover Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney. And I believe it's in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh. Sorry, Pittsburgh is in what state, Brandon?
Pennsylvania, that's
right. In Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. And he hates it, and he starts reliving the same day over and over again. But it's classic Bill Murray. It's great paced. It's hilarious movie. It's very engaging. I love it. My girlfriend loves it. And so I recommend watching the movie Groundhog Day. It's fantastic. Have yourself a belated Groundhog Date with the person you love or with yourself, because I'm sure you love yourself as well. Brandon, pick of the week?
I had a much more technical material thing I was going to go with, but I had an experience this morning that's kind of changed my pick of the week, and I'll bring the material one back next week. As many of you know, Glenn and our business has been closed, again, multiple times over the last 10 months. And I would definitely say that as a business owner, I'm not super happy with how Canada and the Ontario province provincially has handled things from a business owner perspective and businesses and lack of individualization and so on and so forth. But my pick of the week is very much a shout out to the town of Newmarket, and it's the town of Newmarket. And the reason why I would say that is that as every town, there are multiple layers of leadership, right? You have the mayor, you have all these different offices within the township. And frankly, it's nearly impossible to get in touch with any of these offices unless you have a major problem or you have some inquiry that's going to change their regulation looking at what you do. And I got to say that the town of Newmarket, from a business owner perspective, I have had more personal phone calls with the mayor, the business office, phone calls and emails with the mayor, the head of bylaw offices, the Chamber of Commerce CEO, and all these people who are township leaders, all really trying to help and offering support and vouching for businesses like Strata. So I gotta say, as much it may be a much more cheesy, I don't like these kind of like philosophical, not quite a practical thing, but I do want to do a shout out for the pick of the week to the town of Newmarket. I have never been more proud to be a Newmarket resident specifically. I can't say necessarily the rest for Ontario and Canada. I love Canada, but let's be serious. Newmarket, I'm very, very happy with how their leadership has been trying to help support us, and even York Region, Dr. Kiergy. So my pick of the week is town of Newmarket. Not much you can do with that, but I'm very honored to live in this town and have the support of this town.
One love, Brendan. I totally agree with you 100%.
So everyone, thank you so much for checking out this episode. Glenn did a fantastic job of talking about all these different biases and different definitions. I hope the information that we went over with some of the more practical examples was helpful for you. Glenn, you did an amazing job. I loved this. This was a great episode. Everyone, thank you so much for listening to this. If you found this episode of Minds on Muscle enjoyable, please share it with some friends. We'd love to have more people check it out. If you don't mind, give us a 5-star rating. We're on YouTube, Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify, and we would love for you to check out more episodes. We got a lot of great content up there, and Glenn and I have no plans on stopping. Glenn, where can humans find us when we are reopened and we're allowed to have more than 3 people in here?
Oh, well, as you aptly mentioned, we are in the Newmarket area. We are just north of Davis Drive and Leslie. We do our best to keep our clients safe and happy and healthy while they're with us. I know there's a huge priority for Brandon, a huge priority for everyone that worked there. So rest assured, you're going to be in good hands if you come by. When we are opened up, we'd love to have you swing by, check out all the equipment, and stop by and pick our brains. We would love to hear from you.
Everyone, thank you so much for listening. Glenn and I want you exercising pain-free. Check us out on YouTube. Check out www.stratainternalperformance.com and rethink your thought process. Thanks for checking it out.
Ciao, everybody.
Take care.